Hello and welcome to today's webinar, gathering over 150 participants from more than 40 different countries of all regions from the globe, and representing regulators, postal operators, and ministries. Today we will focus, as you know, I hope so, on parcel lockers. And during the next hour, we will cover all aspects of delivery to parcel lockers, so including market trends, the environmental impact, and the policies and regulations affecting parcel lockers networks. So before we get started, let's just go through some practical information in the next slide. Yes. So here you have a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface, so what you should be seeing normally. Today's webinar is recorded, so you will have access to the recording, and you can find the presentation in PDF and some documentation in the handouts tab. So in the question tab, feel free to send us any questions you may have on the topic. We will try to answer as many of them as possible in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And if we can't answer all questions, don't worry, we will reply to you by email. And finally, very important information. So at the end of the webinar, you will have a short survey, and we invite you to give us some feedback. It will take you less than 1 minute, I promise, and it helps us a lot improving future events, but it also is a good action towards the planet because we will commit to plant a tree for each feedback we receive. So give us feedback, you will plant trees. So that is a very good action. So today with us, I have the pleasure to introduce you for their very first webinar, Céline and Michael. So Céline follows postal regulations in Europe. She holds a master's degree in economic law from the University of Brussels and an advanced degree in information and communication technology law from the University of Namur. And Michael, with us today, also follows postal regulations in Europe. He holds a BA in law from the University of Oxford. So thank you, Céline and Michael, for being with us today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this exclusive webinar on the rise of parcel lockers in the postal delivery sector. Few words on who we are for those who do not know us. For over 35 years old, we monitor and analyze regulatory developments in 8 sectors. So in telecoms, media, digital economy, postal, competition, spectrum, consumer protection, and finally sustainability. Plus, our global trends cover developments all around the world on interesting topics. Our footprint is Europe, Americas, and Middle East and North Africa. All of these represent 70 countries. So today with our discussion, our key is to delve into the growth of parcel lockers and to understand their current and potential role in the postal sector.
Thank you very much, Céline. So just to give you a rough overview of the topics that we will be covering today, we're going to start by discussing on a very general basis what parcel lockers are. Then secondly, we'll discuss why they've become so popular with both consumers and operators. Then we'll delve into the regulation or the potential regulation of parcel lockers a little bit. And finally, we'll discuss whether parcel lockers are a sustainable solution. So I think we're ready to start. Céline, could you explain to me a little bit why the topic of parcel lockers is so interesting to us these days?
Yes, of course. So parcel lockers represent a cutting-edge evolution in the European postal sector, driving innovation and fostering multiple entrants. And today's fast-paced world, the surge in e-commerce has made more reliable and efficient the last mile delivery solutions, more crucial than ever. So our focus today will be only on business to consumer segment of parcel sector, because the growth of parcel lockers is largely driven by the online shopping boom. In fact, in 2020, 71% of European consumers purchased online, against 66 in 2019, and the World Economic Forum expects the demand for urban last mile delivery to grow a further 78% by 2030. The problem is that consumers are always more and more demanding and seek to purchase anywhere, anytime, and from any devices, and also experience rapid, efficient, and secure delivery. However, home delivery has its own limit when it comes to delivering a parcel. Why? Then because consumers are often away when parcel is delivered, with 58% of consumers being less time at home than before COVID. And we see also operators struggling to deliver efficiently, given the large number of parcels to be delivered on a daily basis. So this results in missed, lost, or even stolen parcels and triggers repeated delivery attempts, all of which contribute to greenhouse gas emission and traffic and nuisance and so on. So parcel lockers represent a solution to address this challenge by offering a secure and convenient way for consumers to collect their parcel.
Right. So it seems that what you're saying is that in this new world with e-commerce, home delivery doesn't always work for all consumers anymore. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So can you explain to me a little bit what parcel lockers are?
Yes, so parcel locker is one of the collection and distribution point solution, but they are way cooler from what you might remember from your hygiene locker. Parcel lockers allow to store your parcel for a limited amount of time, in which a customer can collect their parcel in an autonomy way. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. But parcel lockers also allow to send a parcel, to pick up a parcel, but also to return a parcel.
Yes.
So have you seen one of these in Brussels?
Yeah, I mean, I get the feeling that they're kind of popping up like mushrooms, you know. So even on my way to work this morning, I saw one. So it seems like I could start using it, but I haven't done it before. Could you take me through in practice how a consumer would use a parcel locker?
So, for example, you, Michael, as a consumer, first of all, you will purchase online one of your favorite products, and before paying your order, you will choose your delivery, which will be in that case parcel lockers. Once your parcels arrive, the courier will drop your parcel into one of the lockers using a unique code or barcode, depending, and then you get instantly notified by email or SMS, or sometimes through a mobile app. And then whenever it suits you the best, you go to the parcel lockers, you scan your barcode or you enter your unique code, and the corresponding lockers open automatically. And then you can collect your parcel. And how easy is that? I mean,
Yeah, okay. So it's like a very easy method to pick up a parcel. But I would argue that home delivery, you know, where the parcel actually comes to your house, is even easier. So why would a consumer, in what situations would a consumer prefer to use parcel lockers over home delivery?
Well, there is few reasons. The first one will be the availability. So you are not tied up by any delivery slots or business opening hours anymore. You choose the time that suits you the best. So it can be day, night, during the weekend, before, yes, or before or after work if you are a really busy person. So really you choose your time. And then it's cheap in comparison to home deliveries. So parcel lockers allow to decrease operational costs by 10 to 20% in comparison to home delivery, and that saving is actually passed on to the consumer. And we see sometimes that some e-commerce retailers are willing to pay that cost, meaning that it's free. That's another reason. The other one is the rapidity. So we know that is essential for consumer, right? From purchasing to collecting, and that's where parcel locker has a great potential. Do you know how much time does it take you to collect your parcel since as of you are in front of the parcel lockers?
I don't know, like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that, maybe.
Yeah. It's a good
Ballpark,
estimation,
yeah.
yes. So it varies, and it can be between 7 seconds to 12 minutes, depending on your digital skills, and also on the length of any queue, but it's really rare. Another point is the security. So your parcel should be in safe hands. Why? The first reason is that you are the only one to receive that unique code or barcode. The other possibility is that some parcel lockers are equipped with high advanced security features such as camera or real-time connectivity to private or public police companies. And on top of that, you really got to prove that your parcel was actually delivered to this parcel locker. So in general, it helps to solve the porch piracy, where parcels are stolen from consumer after an unintended delivery drops.
Right. This is also, I mean, this reminds me, we discussed this news story recently where the government of New York, the city government, is trialing a new parcel locker network, specifically because they've been dealing with so many reported lost and stolen parcels, exactly this port piracy problem. But I think the numbers that they were saying were crazy, something like 90,000 a day, something like that. I don't know about that.
Yeah, it seems really probably high.
But it's obviously a solution for that problem if that's a struggle.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And then the last point will be the eco-friendliness. So actually, home delivery contributes tremendously to emissions. So we know that a driver will take much more longer to deliver to hundreds of addresses than it were delivered in bulk to out of home. So by cutting down on kilometers, we cut down emissions and we contribute to curb climate change.
Yeah, on this topic, there's actually quite a lot of debate back and forth. So perhaps later in this, at the end of this presentation, we can discuss that in a bit more detail and take the different sides.
Sounds good. So we see that there are a few reasons why a consumer would opt for parcel delivery.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that from a lot of these that we see on the site, a lot of them seem to depend on location, right, and access. Like it's convenient because of the location and access. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's very true. We know that parcel locker is really a location game. Usually, we find parcel lockers in three main places. The first one will be what we call public parcel locker, is what we can find along the street in public spaces in general. And then we have what we call semi-private lockers. So it can be in gas stations, shops, even university, train station, and so on. And then lastly, we have private parcel lockers. They are located usually inside buildings or even larger companies. But for the purpose of this webinar, we will focus on these first two parcel lockers. Yes.
Okay. Great. So we've discussed quite a lot of reasons why parcel lockers might work for consumers, but I can also think of some reasons why it might not. I mean, there's also some downsides. In particular, I mean, the biggest thing that distinguishes parcel locker delivery from home delivery is the fact that consumers are expected to take time and effort out of their day to pick up their parcel. So this is one pretty big drawback, especially for people who might be quite busy. You know, they might not find the time. Then there's the issue that parcel lockers, they usually have a standard size. So only a certain size and irregular object usually won't fit into parcel lockers. Thirdly, there's the issue that parcel lockers can't increase in size during peak seasons. So during really peak seasons like Black Friday or Christmas, when people are really ordering a lot online, you might get into the risk where all parcel lockers are full and there's this kind of traffic in parcel delivery. Finally, two more points are that most parcel lockers have a time limit for people to pick up their parcel. So I think in Belgium for bpost it's 3 to 5 days. I might be wrong, which should usually be enough time, but it doesn't work for everyone. Some people again might be very busy, or they might be away during the time. They might not have the time to pick up their parcel. And then finally, this is a point about accessibility and social inclusion, because parcel lockers are a new technology and they require some level of knowledge of how to use an app, how to use a barcode, how to use technology, and this might exclude certain demographics which are less familiar with technology, such as the elderly, for example. Yeah.
So there are clearly upside and downside for using parcel locker, but in practice, do you know if it's really popular with users?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the big question, and we were interested to find this out. So we carried out a little bit of maybe an unscientific poll on our LinkedIn page. So just to see if our followers were familiar with parcel lockers and what their thoughts were. And we found that actually amongst our followers, about 50% of people said they had used parcel lockers in the past, compared to 43% who had never used them. When we asked them what reasons were what might prevent them from choosing a parcel locker, the biggest one was the points that you raised about location. So it was about distance from a parcel locker. People don't want to travel too far. They don't want to do too much work to pick up their parcel. And then the secondary points were, not having enough time, and then price was also quite important to them.
Do you have any statistics?
Any real statistics? Any real
or research that can back up our
luckily, yes.
Our financial experience.
So according to Cullen International's research, there is a huge growth in parcel locker networks in most countries. So the fact that parcel lockers are growing and seem to be growing so quickly does suggest that there's a pretty clear and a pretty serious consumer demand for this delivery mode. Parcel lockers, especially during COVID, saw their numbers increase because parcel lockers have this promise of contactless delivery. As you can see in this chart, in 12 countries that we studied, in about 4 years, we saw a tripling of the parcel locker network. So obviously, I mean, unless operators are doing this without any demand, obviously people are asking for this to some extent. At the same time, there's a caveat that the situation is not the same in every country. The popularity of parcel lockers varies a lot between individual countries and also between demographics. Research shows that younger people between 18 and 24 are much more willing to use parcel lockers than other demographics. And also overall, while parcel lockers are becoming more popular, home delivery remains the overwhelming preference across all countries that we saw. If you look at this graph, you can actually see that in many countries, people remain quite resistant to using parcel lockers. So if you just compare Italy, about 3 in 10, only about 3 in 10 people said they would never use parcel lockers. When you compare that research to the Netherlands, 60% of people were resistant. So you can see quite a big difference between those countries in how they responded to parcel lockers.
Yes, but I'm not surprised by Belgium results. We know in 2021, only 1% of the total of parcel and express volume was delivered through parcel lockers. It's the same percentage as 3 years ago. That said, the total number of parcels being delivered increased by 75% between 2018 and 2021, and the network of bpost also more than quadrupled in 4 years. What was interesting is that the Belgian consumer would accept parcel locker as a delivery method in case of a reduction of €2 in comparison to €1 to €1.50 for a delivery point.
Interesting. Okay, so that suggests that the market is still small in Belgium, but it is growing. And also, crucially, the question of price might be a big factor in the adoption amongst consumers of parcel lockers. But so we can say that maybe in Belgium, the parcel locker market is not so developed yet, or is still starting to develop. Are there any countries where the market is a little bit more mature, has developed a little bit more?
Well, when you talk about locker, you have to mention Poland. Poland is the fastest growing market, expanding by 17% approximately per year, and is the most competitive one with at least 5 providers on the market. And for example, in Post has the largest number of parcel stations in Europe. Last year, for example, 43% of parcels were delivered through their parcel lockers versus 10% in 2015.
Wow.
So actually, we understand that parcel locker is a question of investment over time. When we look at when they entered the market, it was 15 years ago already. So consumer had the time to get used to this new method. And we asked the Polish consumer, and 97% responded having using parcel lockers. So it's incredibly high.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, over time, more people get used to it. There's 5 competitors is a lot. It reminds me when we were researching for this webinar, we have an Estonian colleague who sent us some pictures of the situation next to our home. I think we can put those on the slide now. Let's see if that comes up. Yes. No. Okay, well, it doesn't matter. We had some pictures which showed that in one supermarket, I think there were like 4 or 5 competitors really close to each other, big parcel, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, Estonia is really a country of where parcel lockers are really popular. As you said, more than 5 different providers in one spot. The competition is really high. But in 2021, a study showed that parcel locker was one of the preferred delivery method amongst the consumer. And we have to keep in mind is that Estonia is one of the densest network in Europe.
Okay. Okay. So just to wrap up, when it comes to the question of are parcel lockers popular? Well, they are getting more popular, but there's variation between countries, and it seems like a lot depends on the specific market conditions in each of these places. But some broad conclusions we might be able to pull out of that is that consumer take-up of parcel lockers is dependent on price incentives. So as we saw in the Belgian example, people, if it's cheaper, people are willing to take that extra mile. Convenience and proximity, so the network density in Poland and Estonia kind of demonstrate that. And then finally, consumer awareness over time of parcel lockers as an option means that people are more comfortable with using them. Yeah, as an option.
Interesting. So we have talked a lot about the consumer side, but what about the operation side? What are the advantages for operators?
Yes, so it's not just consumers driving this new solution necessarily. There's also many reasons why operators like parcel lockers or are interested in parcel lockers as a delivery mode. So the first one that we can talk about is parcel lockers allow for the consolidation of deliveries. So what that means is one of the problems that we talked about with the boom in e-commerce is that all of a sudden now you have a lot of parcels being bought from a lot of places to a lot of addresses. And this is a huge operational cost to route all these parcels to where they need to go. And it causes the problem of scale and fragmentation of orders. Parcel lockers offer the option to deliver parcels in bulk to a single location instead of individual delivery to lots of different locations. And this saves time and logistical cost. As a result, the operational cost is reduced The last mile is by far the most complex and expensive part of the e-commerce chain. It costs approximately 50%, I think, of total parcel delivery is in that last mile. And so by consolidating that, you get to reduce a large portion of your cost. Furthermore, you eliminate the risk of missed deliveries because delivery to parcel lockers is almost 100% compared to home delivery, where often people are not at home. So operators ensure they don't have to repeat any costly delivery attempts. We have a study here which kind of shows a little bit the factors involved with this and where the price savings are coming from. They're coming from the consolidation and they're coming from the increased delivery rate. Finally, and also I think what's clear from this table is that the more home deliveries are replaced by parcel lockers, the greater the operational savings will be. And I think that's the case even if there's quite limited use of a parcel locker if you discount some of the capex and the starting up costs for starting a parcel locker network. Even quite limited use of parcel lockers should lead to some degree of cost savings for parcel operators. And then there's also the question that parcel lockers usually don't involve, if they're managed by the operator themselves, they don't involve an extra fee, as for example for parcel shops they might need to pay. So there's also cost savings there. And then the final advantage that I thought of was again the security point. You know when you've delivered, you have a paper trail, and operators can guarantee that the parcels will be safe there and there will be less theft complaints as a result.
So many of the operational disadvantages for consumer are quite similar for operators. Is that right to say?
Yes, I think so. For the disadvantages, if we look at those, just wait for that slide to show up. Yeah, okay, that's fine. There we go. Some of the disadvantages, they're very similar. I mean, they're just the other side of the coin compared to the consumer. So they are the fact that they don't accept large objects, so you can never consolidate. Large parcels, you will still need to do home delivery. Also, capacity and volume can be problems during peak period. But also a whole other side of it is that there's, the operator has a lot of strategic concerns when they're considering whether to invest in a parcel locker network.
So you mentioned about investment. Do you have any estimation of what can cost the installation of parcel locker for an operator?
Yes, definitely. So a parcel locker is a real investment for operators, and so like any big investment, this comes with a financial risk. We got some data from the latest report from Doddle, which is some really interesting kind of statistics and prices. As you can see on the slide now. For example, I mean, we're talking about the Estonian case, but let's talk about, a supermarket. If you want, this is like a strategic, busy area with sufficient capacity. If you want to install a serious parcel locker, which means at least 50 compartments, it could cost you up to 19,000 euros for the equipment, about 2,000 euros to then install it. And then every year since, about 2,100 in terms of running costs. So that's in the first year, you're investing almost 25,000 euros. And since there is all this investment, operators want to be sure to get a good return by ensuring that parcel lockers are actually used by people. So this means having a dense network, having a very well spread out network around strategic points, and also making sure that there's a certain amount of parcel volume being delivered and routed through these lockers.
So everything comes down to location, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where the battle of the first mover advantage will start, because the economy of scale is high and public space is scarce. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you mentioned location, you mentioned all this. And access. Do you think, is this why I hear so many people talk about regulating parcel lockers and regulating access? Is it this first mover advantage?
Yes, definitely, yes.
Okay, so all right, so let's take a moment after having discussed sort of the operational side of lockers. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about regulation. If I understand correctly, at the moment there's not so much going on, right, in terms of regulation.
Well, no, generally speaking, the market at the EU level is not regulated. Many regulators are still monitoring the market. For example, the British regulator Ofcom expressed that he will not take any action because the market is still young and developing, and the market is quite competitive as we observe many entrants over the last few years.
Okay, okay. So in practice, we can say that regulation is still limited, but that hasn't stopped any discussion about it amongst regulators and also amongst scholars. So maybe what we can say is that when we talk about regulation of parcel lockers, usually we talk about two things. We talk about whether parcel lockers are postal services or whether they need a postal authorization of license. And then secondly, there is this question of mandating access to parcel lockers for competition reasons.
So let's talk about authorization. Why would a parcel lockers operator need an authorization?
Okay, okay. So why would a parcel locker need authorization? A parcel locker would need authorization if it is a postal service. If they need authorization or license, then they will be bound by license conditions, which might be things like contributing to the funding of the postal regulator, or they might have quality of service requirements, for example. So in Europe, as we can see on this slide, we have sector-specific regulation for the postal sector, which is called the Postal Services Directive. Under Article 2 of the Postal Service Directive, postal services are defined as involving the clearance, the sorting, the transport, and the distribution of postal items. So following the CGEU case Convetra, it's generally accepted that if you are an operator of any kind and you offer one of those four things, whether it's one or four, you are a postal operator, with the caveat that you cannot only be offering transport. You have to be also covering clearance, sorting, or distribution of postal items. Okay, yeah.
So in that case, where do parcel lockers fit in?
So I think when we're thinking about these four things, so again, clearance, sorting, transport, and then distribution of postal items, I think it's clear that parcel lockers tend to come within the distribution phase. So the question becomes, is operating a parcel locker by itself part of the distribution phase? In my opinion, it's best to think about this, to try and kind of simplify what a parcel locker actually does and the kind of parts of delivery through a parcel locker, which to me seems, first of all, that the parcel is delivered to the parcel locker, then that it's stored in the parcel locker, and finally that the user takes the parcel from the parcel locker. In practice, in most discussion of this issue, it seems like only one of the parts of this, delivering the parcel into the parcel locker by an operator, could qualify as part of the postal service. Because just by analogy, you know, there are many and have been many, for example, local grocery stores that have this service of, you know, collecting, or, you know, the parcel is collected, is delivered there, and then you go and collect it there. But we would never say that a local grocery store needs a postal license or that it's a postal operator. So in that sense, I think by analogy, I think that the parcel locker has a very similar role in the delivery chain to, like, for example, your local grocery store. And it seems therefore unlikely that a regulator would require an operator which is purely postal locker based, i.e. it only takes care of the postal locker part, to apply for a postal license. And I think in practice, we find that the very few regulators who have commented on this question, they seem to agree with this interpretation. So for example, in 2018, Italian regulator AGCOM fined Amazon for providing postal services without a license. And part of the argument they made was that Amazon was using its parcel locker network to distribute postal items. So using parcel lockers in some way did make it a postal service provider. But it has to be remembered that parcel lockers were only part of this decision, only part of the picture. The regulator was pretty clear that parcel lockers were part of Amazon's postal infrastructure, but it was delivering to that parcel locker that counted as a postal service. And similarly, in 2020, the Spanish regulator also discussed Amazon's use of parcel lockers, and it also said that managing and owning a parcel locker network as part of its delivery activity could qualify as a postal service. But crucially, again, it talked about it in the context, it said that delivering to a place which is not the final address is not new. It's just parcel locker technology which is new. So again, by that analogy, it's delivering to that parcel locker that makes it a postal service specifically.
And we know that discussion around authorization is not just only inside the EU, right? There's happening in some places where, for example, the Postal Service Directive does not apply. We know that in Turkey early this year, the regulator BTK decided that every player that deliver a parcel to a parcel locker do require an authorization, regardless if you are what we can call a traditional postal operator. And the key objective of this new decision was to solve the problem of the competitive disadvantages that can have these traditional players in comparison to these new players on the market, such as e-commerce entities. So that's an interesting case. And for example, they also impose certain technical obligation on both either you are a postal operator or non-traditional postal operators.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting case because that is definitely the first time that I've heard of a postal regulator imposing technical requirements, you know, on traditional, on specifically operators that have parcel locker. It's interesting and might be kind of show us one way that we might regulate in the future, that regulators might consider regulating in the future in other places as well.
I agree.
Okay, so I think we sort of covered there the form of regulation where a parcel locker would be qualified as a postal service and therefore would be subject to license conditions. How about now we cover the possibility of mandating access to parcel locker? So the access question. Could you expand a little bit on this question?
For sure. So access can be mandated through Article 11A of the Postal Service Directive or under General European Competition. So under Article 11A of the PSD, we see that member states can mandate access condition to infrastructure inside the universal service. However, so far, parcel lockers have never been qualified as postal universal service, as far as we are aware. For example, in 2018, the Spanish regulator said, no, it's not an universal service. Why? Well, because it's added value service. It's not a basic service. So at the moment, Article 11A of the Postal Service Directive does not seem to apply to parcel lockers. So we can move on the competition law for access, which applies across all services. So the question, so just to remind ourselves, why competition? Well, competition allows to protect consumer in case if they suffer from a competitive market, which means higher prices, lower quality, less innovation, and so on. So let's dig in if a parcel lockers operator would be forced to give access to his own network under the theory of essential facility. So an operator in a dominant position can be actually penalized for abuse if its competitors are denied access to an infrastructure considered as an essential facility. But under this theory, you need to prove three strict cumulative criteria. Let's go one by one. So the infrastructure must be owned by a dominant undertaking. So this means that you have to find and to define the relevant market to find after this the dominant position. But regarding parcel locker, which market are we talking about? This task is already complex by itself. Even so, let's say we find the market and we find the dominant position. We need to prove that the infrastructure must be indispensable for the competitors. However, it doesn't seem to be, well, parcel lockers doesn't seem to be an essential facility. Why? Because actually they can be substituted by existing delivery methods such as home delivery, post offices delivery, or even shops. So for this condition, it seems to be really difficult to prove. And then you have to prove that the infrastructure cannot be duplicated under reasonable condition. Well, for this condition as well, we see many new entrants developing their own network, which are not dominant players. So there is no legal or technical or economic obstacle preventing this duplication of this network. And even so, if let's say we prove these three conditions, a dominant position, dominant player, so we can always justify themselves why they would refuse that access. Well, they can say that it's a problem of compartments, the number are limited, so it's a bit tricky for that theory as well.
Okay. So if I am summarizing correctly, it's that at the moment, the conditions in the markets that we're don't really seem to give rise to competition problems, right?
Yes.
But you could imagine if the market changed, that position could change as well, right? I think the Spanish case that we talked about earlier, I think the regulator expressed that it could impose access if parcel lockers became essential to compete on the parcel market. So it could envisage that, but it just wasn't interested at the moment. So we can imagine that one day, consumer behavior changes so much that it really becomes the main way of delivering. And then we can also imagine an issue where there's a scarcity of space because municipalities might limit the number of spaces for urban planning reasons or for environmental reasons you mentioned before. I think you told me that you had heard of the Belgian government is at least thinking about or considering in some way implementing legislation to open access to existing parcel locker networks, right?
Yes, it's what I heard in a podcast, but even so, it seems that the market are sufficiently competitive. Actually, under the current market conditions, we saw many operators that have already opened their networks. Even according to our current international research, we found out that 8 of the 17 countries have already opened the network. So for now, it seems that on a commercial basis, so it seems like the mandatory access is not a requirement for now.
Yeah, in many markets, parcel locker operators might voluntarily do it because it makes sense from a business point of view.
Exactly.
Okay, so just to conclude a little bit on the regulation of parcel lockers, it seems that for the moment, there's not that much of it. And the main reasons of that seem to be that for now, the market is still very young. It seems to be working quite well for both operators and consumers. And it's still innovating, it's still competitive. Regulators are still waiting a little bit because they don't know where the market might go. It might evolve in surprising ways. And if it's working, you don't necessarily want to stop that right now. Yeah.
I remember earlier we said that parcel lockers are maybe a sustainable way to deliver a parcel. Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Sure. So we mentioned earlier, and we said we would leave it for the end because I think there's actually quite a lot to talk about there. So first of all, obviously everyone is aware that sustainability is a very hot topic these days. Many companies are being asked by their governments, but also by their consumers, to reduce their environmental footprint. And that's the same in the postal sector. They're also, feeling this pressure. So in the parcel sector, the biggest impact that companies have on the environment is from the greenhouse gases that are emitted by the vehicles that actually take the parcels from the drop-off point. They take it to sorting center and then finally to that last mile. As we've put up on the slide here, that the Finnish universal service provider Postal has commented that online shoppers could reduce their CO2 emissions significantly just by choosing parcel lockers. And I think some of the words used there, routing their parcels along their everyday routes, for example, look at workplace, kind of gives a hint about the discussion we're going to have about that. But before we do that, I just want to make some terms clear. We often talk in sustainability, and especially when we talk about emissions, we talk about these terms scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Just to explain very briefly what they are in the context of the parcel market. Scope 1 is emissions that come from the company's own activity. So for parcel operators, that's usually the fleet, that they drive, the cars that they drive, the vans that they drive to move parcels around. Then scope 2 is the emissions that come from the generation of the electricity that parcel operators use. So, for example, all the computers at the head office run on electricity, and that electricity came from often burning fossil fuels. So that's scope 2. And then finally, scope 3 is all the rest. So it's the upstream and downstream emissions from suppliers and end users. And I think in this, today we'll talk mostly about scope 1 and scope 3. Yeah, so as we said before, in the parcel sector, the biggest impact that companies have is in that scope 1. It is in that delivering using vehicles. And the last mile may account for up to half of the total emissions from vehicles in the delivery chain. Therefore, for a parcel operator, if they can tackle that last mile, that's very significant for their own emission reduction targets. So it's obvious that they want to focus a lot of energy on that.
And in that case, can parcel lockers help to tackle those emissions?
So maybe, but the answer is a little bit complicated. So if you take into account only the scope 1 emissions, the emissions that they emit themselves, it's very clear that parcel lockers have a positive impact when it comes to reducing emissions. So the University of Krakow and InPost did a study a few years ago where they showed that delivering a single parcel to a home consumed about 300 grams of carbon dioxide, or the equivalent of carbon dioxide, versus only 14 grams for delivering the parcel to a parcel locker. So obviously that's a huge difference per parcel. Furthermore, I read in a paper that delivery to parcel lockers in urban areas could reduce operators' emissions by 2/3 in the best case scenario, and even more in rural areas. Just to explain a little bit how and why those emissions are saved, there's a link with the consolidation discussion we were having earlier. By delivering many parcels to a single locker instead of to many individual addresses, the vans reduce the total kilometers they drive. Fewer kilometers they drive, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, basically. Then if you add to that, again, no more missed deliveries, that's also a huge savings in kilometers driven and fossil fuels burned. So we know that failed deliveries account for about 25% of total distance driven by delivery trucks. So imagine reducing at once 25% of your kilometers driven. That's pretty big.
But I will have to play the devil here. But in theory, that sounds really great. But
yes.
For me, this analysis misses a huge part of that story, right? Like, what about the emission from the consumer when they pick up their parcel? For example, I imagine if a parcel locker is really far from their home or even work, they might actually use their car to pick up this parcel. So your parcel's emission will end up to be higher than if it were delivered at home.
Yeah, so this is the hidden cost in a way. So obviously for an operator's scope 1 emissions, it looks really good. But to see if parcel lockers actually make an impact on overall emissions, you have to actually look at those scope 3 emissions. So the emissions that the consumers have when they actually pick up their parcel. So relevant factors in calculating true emissions associated to each parcel delivered to a parcel locker include, as you said, the method to travel to a parcel locker. Are they walking? Are they taking a bus? Or are they using their Range Rover? That's obviously makes a huge difference. If they are driving, how far the consumer has to drive. And then finally, there's this question of consolidation on the consumer side. So is the consumer making a special trip to go pick up their parcel, or are they combining it with a trip, their weekly trip to shop for groceries or during the school run or something like this? So to take into account all of those factors and to create an actually accurate model for the scope 3 emissions, it requires us to have a hell of a lot of data that probably we don't have. A lot of data like consumer behavior and how they actually pick up their parcels. So we probably don't have enough data to make a truly comprehensive model, but what we can say is that a recent study showed that in Brussels, about half of the people who prefer to use parcel lockers made a detour to collect their parcel. And about half of those people drove a car to make that detour. So for those consumers, they probably didn't save on emissions, and they may even have increased the emissions associated with their parcel. Then when you look on the other hand, also in Belgium, but in another city, in Mechelen, a recent trial by bpost of ecological delivery methods found that about 85% of consumers walked or biked to get their parcel, and 81% of those traveled less than 500 meters to get to the locker. So in that case, we're probably seeing big gains in terms of emissions reductions. So that's really good. So all of that is to say, what we can conclude is that, first of all, yes, parcel lockers have the potential to reduce emissions in certain use cases. So in urban, densely populated areas, easily accessible parcel lockers will probably reduce the environmental impact, especially in cities with very good public transport or that are very walkable or bikeable. In more rural areas, less dense, probably the environmental impact is likely to be mitigated a lot because consumers will need to travel further and they're much more likely to use their car to do so.
And another point that I want to add is that we see this trend of the universal service provider trying to convert their delivery fleet to electric vehicles, which are more efficient and will reduce emissions. So even on our current research, we found out that 13 out of 17 USPs have set a clear target to reduce or to change their fleets. So if we are heading to a future where operators will deliver parcel to home using these non-emitting vehicles, the argument of sustainability for parcel locker would become way less relevant.
Yeah, totally agree.
So yeah, all in all, I think what is important is that eco-conscious consumer can make this, can have these informed choices when they have to choose their preferred delivery method.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it doesn't seem right that you would tell a consumer that they're choosing an eco-conscious option when actually, in their use case, it doesn't really make a difference. Okay, great. So we've covered their sustainability of parcel lockers, and that brings us to the end of our discussion. So before we see if there's any audience questions, I just want to ask you, Celine, what you find most interesting in terms of conclusions about this topic.
Well, I have to say this market is really interesting on many aspects, and which is involving a lot of different profile of players. But for me, the main point is really the parcel locker is really a location game. So because we changed the delivery dynamic where the consumer are completely passive by waiting their package at home to a consumer becoming active by collecting their package to a parcel locker. So the dynamic change, and it needs to be a collaboration actually between operators and users. And so far we see that users quite respond positively to this new method, and it's really an interesting case on the market.
Yeah, it seems almost like, we talk about parcel lockers solving the last mile problem, but it's almost like you're not really doing that. It's the parcel operator is doing half the mile and then asking the consumer to do the other half mile, to kind of meet in the middle. So it seems that if you're going to do that, you need to give the consumer good incentives to do part of that work, that previously they were not expected to do.
Yeah, I agree.
So for me, I think what I find very interesting is the variety between countries. Every country we looked at just was very different, and not just between countries, but also between demographics. So the different ages, people were very, they had completely different attitudes about parcel lockers and whether they were willing to use them. And then even the urban versus rural divide, like from an operator's point of view, they might make way more sense in denser places than in environment than in rural places. And this also connects to the sustainability discussion. It's not a black and white discussion about it's good or it's bad. It's in certain use cases it's good, in certain use cases it doesn't fit.
Sure. And you know what? I'm really like excited and looking forward to see how the postal regulation will look like. Know that we are still waiting for the revision of the postal directive and also a study from DG Grow expected next year. So I'm really excited to see what are their view and what they will decide.
What does the future hold for the possible regulation? Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you for listening to us. Sarah, maybe we can respond some questions if there are any questions.
Well, first, congrats on this very interesting presentation. We have some questions and some quite interesting remarks too from participants. I can see that it's a very evolving topic. So of course, there are some questions, especially about the future. Well, we have first one question from Brazil. So someone who woke up a bit early today to listen to you. So Franklin is asking if regulators are considering parcel lockers as a way to achieve universal postal service, and maybe you can also explain why parcel lockers are not in the universal service. I think it's so why are they not in the universal service, and are regulators considering using it for the postals, for the universal service?
I can start, and if you have anything to add. Sure. So we covered this, but quite briefly. But it is an interesting question. It's a question that comes up a lot. At the moment, we haven't found any regulators that are considering adding parcel lockers to the universal service. I think for the same reason that the Spanish regulator gave in that case that we talked about. So as you said, it was an added value service. It was not seen as a basic service. So that's one reason. Of course, as Celine said, the postal directive is quite old now. Both regulators and operators have been screaming for a revision of it, or at least to check to see if the market has changed enough that there should be a revision for it. So we know that that's slowly ongoing at the moment. So it's possible that they will be regarded as part of the universal service one day. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be much appetite for that. But something that I did just think of is we've talked a lot about it as being the distribution, part of the distribution phase, but part of the universal service is also access points. So it's possible that one day regulators will be okay with parcel lockers being designated as access points. Do you agree? And so they could one day perhaps be counted as the universal service to send parcels or to have some kind of access to the postal network. But thank you for the question. It's very, very interesting. And at the moment, the answer is not really, but it could develop.
Yeah. It depends. So you emphasize also on location at some point, and according to you, which locations are the best for parcel lockers? On site.
Well, this is quite operational. Maybe this requires a level of logistical expertise answer, but I think the most important thing is so what's strategic, it's that you put it as close to the consumer as possible. So you want to put it where consumers actually are, which means train stations, which means supermarkets, often in centers where a lot of people pass by, because that's where you actually reach people. It's this kind of strategic balance of trying to get as close to the consumer as possible without overstretching yourself and undoing all of those gains that you get from consolidating your parcel trips.
And also considering that people will need time to take time from their already very busy schedule. So
exactly. And also, I mean, this is also what we were trying to say before. Celine, you made this point. There are certain strategic points, like I said, train stations, supermarkets, but these are relatively rare. So could you get to a point, for example, where the first mover advantage is such that there's no more new entrants because all the good position, all the good places are taken.
Yeah, that's where like not municipalities will decide that we stop in that space and we should not look at this grant this access that operators already have this parcel lockers need to grant access to other.
It's true. It's true. Municipalities actually have a lot of power.
Yes.
But also supermarkets, like these places often actually have quite a bit of power because they
actually we have another question that is very much linked to that one and to what you just said. It's from Sergey, who's asking like if the location of parcel lockers should not give rise to public procurement issues with local authorities, a bit like we had with the scooters in Paris. So I guess it goes back also to having a good strategy.
Yes, no, I think it's completely right. I can very easily envisage many cases where, municipality wants to very much limit I think in Prague already, might be wrong, but in Prague, the municipality issued guidance to parcel regulators on the kind of colors they're allowed to have and the kind of shape they're allowed to have to be not so obtrusive. But yeah, absolutely, if you have limited space and only certain places to put them, you might come into procurement issues, and that might be the solution forward. Yeah, definitely.
Well, now that you mentioned Czech Republic, we also have Anna, who mentions that a popular trend in Czech Republic is also sharing parcel lockers by several postal operators. Well, it's not a question. I think it's just an observation, but because you mentioned Czech Republic, I thought I would read this.
Yeah, we have a good report on this that shows that actually a lot of operators are voluntarily doing this. So it's a trend. Yeah.
Okay. So we have other questions, but I'm afraid that we already run out of time. And but you will answer the remaining questions by email, as we said. So well, I wanted to thank you, Celine and Michael. I remind our audience that it's their very first webinar, so I think they did a very good job. Just some important information before leaving you to the rest of your day. So if you have any other questions, you have here Celine's and Michael's email. Don't hesitate to send them by email, even if it's tomorrow or the next week. You really don't hesitate to send us your question. Once you leave today's webinar, remember, please leave us some feedback. We plant the tree, and that's also very appreciated for us for future events. And finally, we have a small gift for you. Well, small, depends. That will arrive tomorrow in your inbox regarding our upcoming postal and delivery masterclass that will be organized in Brussels on 21 and 22 November. So it will be a two-day training that will give you really a huge, complete overview of all the regulatory landscape of the European postal and delivery sector. So yeah, you will receive a small surprise linked to that. So check your inbox tomorrow, not your parcel lockers, your inbox. Okay, so well, thank you everyone. Thank you, Celine and Michael, once again. And I think that's it. And we leave you to the rest of your day, and we really hope you enjoyed. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.